Keith Smith, of course, covers the NBA for Yahoo Sports, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. We'll start off with his tweet from 2 hours ago, starting to hear a lot of buzz that the Sixers are letting teams know they are open to trade talks if they hire Mike D'Antoni to be their next head coach. Philly realizes that the current roster with all the bigs isn't built to be successful for a D'Antoni team. A lot to dive into on that. As we know, Billy Donovan was hired last night in Oklahoma City. So essentially, Keith, is it down to Mike D'Antoni and Tyronn Lue to be the next 76ers head coach?
It sounds like it, but they definitely have competition for both of those guys. They are both in the running for other jobs around the league. We know the Houston Rockets job is open. Obviously, D'Antoni's not going back there, but the Indiana Pacers would love to have D'Antoni. The New Orleans Pelicans and the Rockets are both looking at Ty Lue. So I think Philadelphia is probably choice one for Lue. I don't know where D'Antoni comes out, but it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And the expectation is maybe by the end of this week, early next is probably when everything gets wrapped up one way or another.
All right. So in other words, if Mike D'Antoni says, I will take this job, but you're going to have to split these guys up. I mean, is that essentially the way you're hearing things? Or is this coming from the Sixers? Like, hey, we want you, we like your philosophies, and we know that this won't work with our current roster, so we're willing to break some things up just to get you.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both from the folks I've talked to. Is D'Antoni's not coming in and making any kind of ultimatums or anything like that, but he, through the conversations, has made it clear he has his preferred style. The Rockets, he was very appreciative that the Rockets went to the smaller, more perimeter-based grouping. What he didn't like was he was never able to get those guys to play up-tempo, how he really wants to play. He wants to get back to playing that 7 seconds or less style that he had with the Phoenix Suns. Well, with Philadelphia, the current way they're built, there's only a couple guys that really fit that. The rest of the roster is a little more plodding. They're a little more going to get up and down, slowly get up and down the floor, play more in the half court. And I think D'Antoni is not coming in and saying, you have to do these things. But I think Philadelphia is realizing if this is the direction we go, if we're going to maximize this coach, then we know we need to start moving some of these pieces around because they don't all fit exactly what he wants.
I don't know how much the 76ers actually talked to Billy Donovan, but should it be concerning that he looked at Chicago and looked at that roster and went, that's definitely intriguing, maybe more so than the Sixers roster?
I don't know that I would say that necessarily. I think Billy Donovan from my understanding is he got paid pretty healthily from Chicago. They made him a pretty good offer. And on the other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is he knows he has time in Chicago, where with Philadelphia, the expectations are we need to win and we need to win, sooner rather than later. With Chicago, it's, hey, help us get there versus, come in and make us a contender right away. So I think that's why that job was a little more appealing to Billy Donovan. The other piece I would say there is he has younger guys in place and some good passers and things like that with the Bulls that I think that's what he's looking forward to, is kind of replicating a lot of the success he had at both the University of Florida as well as with the Oklahoma City Thunder.
All right, Keith. So let's ask this question then. If Mike D'Antoni gets hired by the Sixers and they had to make a decision, which piece fits better for Mike D'Antoni, Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid? Or are we just assuming that it means that one of those guys would have to go? Or maybe it's like, hey, look, I can't come in here with Al Horford and Tobias Harris. You're going to have to do something there.
Yeah, I think it's more of the latter from what I'm hearing it's we've got to move away from Horford or Harris. I don't think there's any push coming from D'Antoni or anybody on, hey, it's time to split up Embiid and Simmons. Now, Ben Simmons, he can fit D'Antoni's offense wonderfully because while he's not a great shooter, he's a fantastic passer. He's a good ball handler. He can make a lot of things happen. And a lot of what folks have said over the years is, get Ben Simmons into an up-tempo offense, and you're going to see a player really start to blossom because if you're playing fast, the ability to play off him, collapse, and put him in the half court, really kind of ignore him, defensively and those kind of things. Those are things you can't do if you're playing that real up-tempo game. So I don't think it's either or with Simmons and Embiid. I think it's both, but I think it is. We can't go into this year with 4, power forward size guys or 3 power forward size guys in the center as our main pieces. I think they're also willing to listen on Josh Richardson and those types of things, but I don't think there's any desire really to move Simmons or Embiid.
When watching these playoffs, I look at Jokic out there and I just think, wow, he plays the game with this. Oh, man, he's so smart with the game. And I know that's the difference in Embiid. Embiid has like that more raw, natural ability, but he might not have the same IQ. But I just watch him out there and I think to myself, is there a way for Joel Embiid to translate his game to be more like Jokic? Not to take away from Embiid's skill set, but do you think that there's a way that maybe he can mirror some of what Jokic does to help him out there on the court?
He's never going to be the ball handler or passer that Jokic is. Jokic really has, guard skills in a big man body with the way he plays. But I think there are pieces that Embiid can bring to that. And I don't want to make an excuse for him, but I think we forget sometimes that he still hasn't been playing basketball all that long. Compared to some of these guys who, a guy like Jokic, who's been playing since he was 5-6 years old, and Embiid just doesn't have that. But then when you add in that he was robbed of very valuable time early in his career where, he would have been playing through and learning some of these things. But I think what he can get better at, and you saw signs of it as this past season went along, was embracing the double teams, making the right read, and being content with, if the ball doesn't come back to me, it's fine as long as we get a good look out of this, a good shot. And I think that's something that he can learn. And this is where it gets kind of tough. I know at this point Al Horford is, massively overpaid on the contract he's on, but that's another guy Embiid can learn from as far as the ability to embrace the double team, make the right pass, and make those decisions as a passer, because that's something Horford excels at. And still, even in a tough year, he was still a plus passing big man.
How much interest, realistic interest, would there be in Horford? I know the contract's tough, but do people value what he brings, and do some good teams look at him and say he can still help us win, or was last year such a disaster for him that his value has completely plummeted?
Yeah, here's the challenge. There are good teams who really like Al Horford. Their ability to get him, though, is almost nil, because in order to match salary, they'd have to give up good pieces or sacrifice a large chunk of their depth. I can tell you, for example, the Boston Celtics still love Al Horford. They would love to have him still on the team, and that was their hope. But Horford had already moved on and had already agreed with Philadelphia by the time Boston was starting to put together how that could happen last offseason. So the challenge now for the Celtics is to match salary. You're talking about giving up either a large, significant amount of your depth, or you're giving up pieces that it's not a fair value in trade. So that's the challenge with Horford. It almost has to be some kind of 3-team deal where you're moving money around. But then if you're Philadelphia, you have to look at it. You're not going to trade Al Horford at $20+ million and get back a really good player that makes $20+ million. It's just not going to happen. So if you're Philly, what you're looking for is, yeah, maybe these aren't the best players, but if they're better fits for what we're looking to do, then those are the kind of deals that make sense. And in addition to that, it could cost them a good young player, either a Matisse Thybulle or somebody along those lines. Zaire Smith doesn't really have, a lot of value there, or draft picks or something like that to move Horford's contract along.
All this craziness, Chris Paul's name keeps getting mentioned. He's got that monster deal. Does that make sense where the Sixers are? I mean, they went through all this losing to get these young players. You're going to go out and trade for a 38-year-old guy making $40+ million. I mean, does that make sense?
If you could move Horford or Harris in a deal to do that, it absolutely makes sense. Because all you're doing is trading money for money at that point for a player who is a far better fit. At that point, you're locking Ben Simmons in to a playmaking power forward role, similar-ish to what Draymond Green does for the Golden State Warriors. And then you'd have Chris Paul really running your offense. We saw Chris Paul still an all-star, still an all-NBA guy at this point in his career. And I think you could get a lot of mileage out of him. The challenge is going to be is you've got to get the right kind of coach. And if it's Ty Lue or Mike D'Antoni, well, we saw Paul have success under D'Antoni. And Ty Lue, being a former point guard, he would make that happen. But what I would say is every time I get those trades thrown at me, probably 10 times a week, hey, does this work? Well, yeah, it works money-wise, but why in the world would the Oklahoma City Thunder, without being paid significantly to do so, want to take on Horford or Harris's deal where they're at? And you're not. And people say, well, what if we threw them, 2 or 3 first-round picks? You could do that, but the challenge is if they're upcoming picks, those are not going to be very good picks because you expect Philadelphia to have one of the best, somewhere in the best 5-8 records in the league with a Chris Paul. So that becomes a challenge. It always takes 2 teams to make a trade, not just one.
Hypothetically, if that did happen, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be Chris Paul, just in general with Ben Simmons, we saw him with the ball in his hands over the last couple of years, and then towards the back end, we saw him playing off the ball more. And I just want to get your thoughts on, with what you saw, which was very limited action, do you think that there's a road to go down with Ben off the ball? Because personally, I didn't love what I saw, although a new coach and a new system can change things. I like him with the ball in his hands more, but then we can all go back to, obviously, the shooting aspect and how that kills the spacing.
Yeah, what I don't think you can do is play Ben Simmons off the ball and say, go stand in the corner, because then teams are going to say, great, that's a whole side of the floor. We're just not going to defend. But if you can get him involved as a cutter, or you can get him involved as the roll man and pick and roll, now all of a sudden a wonderful amount of options open up for you. It's like a whole new world of basketball because of his size and his ability to both finish at the basket and see the floor. He would be one of the better roll men in the league. The problem is you need a point guard to be able to do that, to work that. We know under Brett Brown, they were one of the lowest pick and roll volume teams in the entire NBA, because when it was Simmons running it, teams just dropped way under it, and they mucked up all the spacing and made a mess of it. If it was Simmons setting the screen, the guy who was coming off it wasn't a good passer. But if you had a good passer in that position and you had Simmons in the role and that passer was also a threat to shoot a little bit, now all of a sudden things really start to change and they look very, very differently for you. So that's the thing. I don't mind him playing off the ball as long as he's still engaged and actively involved in the offense. If you're going to play him off the ball and put him in the corner, then you might as well play somebody else, because that's just completely useless on that end of the floor.
Keith Smith's with us at Keith Smith NBA, Yahoo Sports NBA. Of course, you got game 4 tonight. Celtics are down 2-1. They looked a lot different. Got Gordon Hayward back. You talked about. Now, he didn't have a big impact numerically, but what was his impact on game 3?
The ball moves better when he's on the floor. You can see the ball gets popping around. They hit the paint a lot more. He's one of their better ball handlers with his size and strength. Guys can't bump him off his drive as easy. So he'll get into the paint. He'll make passes on kickouts, and sometimes that leads to the defense scrambling to get into that second paint attack. And that's what Brad Stevens wants his offense to do. Each possession, he wants it to hit the paint at least once, ideally 2 or 3 times, because you're going to create a good shot one way or another out of that. You also saw Hayward get to his own shot. I think his rhythm's off a little bit. His timing's off with his jumper, but so he didn't make quite as many of them, but you saw him get to his shot. And then against the zone defense, he was able to penetrate the gaps in that zone, and having him as the threat of another shooter out there, that put another guy that Miami had to stick a little tighter with, which stretches the zone, that creates those bigger gaps. And you saw Boston, whether through drives or cuts, was able to really get into the teeth of that. They had 5 straight plays in the second half, which is really where they've fallen apart, where they went right at I almost said Joel Embiid. Bam Adebayo at the rim, went right at him 5 consecutive plays, and they ended up with 4 baskets and 2 free throws on that. So that's huge for the Celtics. Defensively for Hayward, his size and strength again allowed them to go to their small lineup, because they were replacing instead of going really small with a Brad Wanamaker in there or somebody like that. They were able to go small with Walker, Tatum, Brown, Smart, and Hayward. While that gives up a lot, those guys are quick enough, they're strong enough, and they're long enough that they can still handle what they need to handle inside, and that's an extremely difficult offensive group to stop. That group was fantastic in the closing moments of the first half, as well as in the closing moments of the game, and I expect Brad Stevens to lean on it even more here tonight in Game 4.
Should be a good one. We'll have that game tonight. The coverage starts at 8 o'clock on 97.3 ESPN. And then the Nuggets, obviously, they get back into it. They thought they should have won Game 2. So are we looking at a knockout, drag-out fight, or are the Lakers going to take control of this one on Thursday night?
Yeah, game 4 is always my favorite game in a series because either it's probably going to be over 3-1, but try to tell the Nuggets that, right? Or it's going to be 2-2, and you're in for a series. So that's always a lot of fun. And so both of these, now we're looking at some fun game 4s. I do think the Nuggets found some stuff that worked. I think they started to find it towards the back half of game 1. And then game 2, they probably should have won that game. And they're feeling really good. And then they feel like with Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, they have two players that their best two players are at the two spots where you can attack the Lakers the easiest. So that makes it a huge challenge for LA. Now, on the flip side, LeBron James didn't play so great in game 2. He didn't play real great in game 3 either. So I think you're looking for LeBron probably to bust out. And I think you're going to see the Lakers, if they're smart, they're going to get Anthony Davis going downhill a little bit more versus settling for so many jump shots. Because when he's been utilized as a role man in this series, they are almost unstoppable. The Nuggets just don't have a player who can stick with them. And if it's LeBron or Rondo, they're setting him up very easily for baskets. So that's going to be a big challenge there. So I think you're going to see the Lakers make a couple adjustments. But I think we're in for a fight the rest of the way. I think that's going to be a close series.
Former Sixer Jeremy Grant had a big night last night for the Nuggets, and, of course, they win. It's 2-1 there. It's 2-1 in the East, and you can hear the Eastern Conference tonight on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Keith Smith on the NBA playoffs and the Sixers offseason news, which they still have not hired a coach, but it looks like it's down to 2, and you can follow him for more at Keith Smith NBA, and he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Keith, always a pleasure, man. We'll talk to you again.
Absolutely. Y'all stay safe, you and yours.